Hi 6th graders, this is our first video on notes, and this one is on tables, graphs, and equations. Remember that if you need to stop the video to catch up, just press pause and then you can come back to it. And the video will be up so you can always rewatch it. Sometimes it takes 2 times to get things, so don't, worry if you have to watch it again. Okay, so your I can statement today is I can solve ratios by creating tables, graphs, and equations. You already know how to do the first part. You know how to make tables. So today we're learning about graphs and equations. So example 1 says, for every boy on the soccer team, there are 4 girls. So our ratio is right here. Okay, and then they write it for us in ratio form. We also know that we can write it in word form, and we can also write it as a fraction. Okay, now we're going to organize our ratio into a table. So we're going to call one side boys and the other side girls. Okay, notice that they're giving me boys first, so I'm putting that on the first side and then girls. Okay, boys are going to be the X and girls are going to be the Y. This is also called the dependent and independent variable. Okay, X is actually the independent variable. It can stand alone, and the Y is the dependent variable. So I'm going to fill in the information that I have first. I know that if I have 1 boy, I'm going to have 4 girls. Well, now I can say if I have 2 boys, I'm going to have 8 girls. And if I increase the number of boys to 3, then I have 12 girls. And if I increase the number of boys to 4, then I have 16 girls. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to my graph. We're going to come back to the table in a minute. I'm going to come down to my graph and I am going to first label what I know. Okay, so we learned about this in one of our bell ringers, I think, but if you need a reminder, this is what we call the y-axis and this is the x-axis, and I need to label them correctly. And this is always y and this is always x. Okay, so x are boys, so I'm going to put that boys down here, and then girls are y, so I'm putting girls here so I don't forget. And then I'm going to start graphing. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the values in my ratio table. So I'm going to make them into coordinates. So 1, 4, 2, 8, 3, 12, and 4, 16. And then I'm ready to graph. Okay, so remember I go x first, this is x, and then I go y, and x is going across and y is going up and down. So I am going to put some values here. I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to stop at 4 because if you notice my x value stops at 4 there. Okay, and then for my y value, which is right here, it is moving up by 4. So rather than me going by ones, because I don't have a very big graph, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to count by 4s. So 4, 8, 12, 16. This is also going to help me write my equation. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just plot my point. So the first one is 1, 4. So I'm going to go across 1 and up to 4. And I'm going to put a point there. The next one is 2, 8. So I'm going to go over to 2, and then I'm going to go up to 8. And then the next one is 3, so I'm going to go over to 3, and then I'm going to go up to 12. Remember, I'm getting these values right from here, okay? And then these values are coming from my table, okay? And then 4, and then I'm going to go up to 16, okay? And then I'm going to connect these dots, and what you should notice is that you have a line and it goes through the origin. The origin is right here. I can also write an equation of this line if I can find the relationship. And so I'm going to go back to my table and see if I can find the relationship between x and y. Some of you may have already seen it. Okay, so I'm looking for the relationship between the two, and it has to work for every part of the table. So I noticed that if I multiply by 4 on the first one, I will get the y value. So for instance, 1 times 4 equals 4. Now if that works for every single one in the table, I found the relationship. So let's check it out. 2 times 4, yep, that gives me 8. 3 times 4, yep, that gives me 12. And 4 times 4, yes, that gives me 16. So I found the relationship. I am multiplying by 4. So what I'm doing is I'm taking 4 and I'm multiplying it by whatever's in the x part of the table, which is boys in this case. And then I will get the number of girls. This will help me make predictions about what's coming next. So for instance, if I was to put a 5 here, I would know that this value would be 20 because I'm multiplying by 4. Okay, but usually we write these equations with the y because they're called functions, and so we usually see them written like this, which is y is equal to 4x. And all I did was rewrite it the other way. I just switched it around. But what this is saying is 4 times x equals y, and that works for every single part of the table. Okay. All right, that's the first one. So if it's a lot, this bottom part is new. You haven't seen this part before, so don't worry. We're going to do another one. Okay, so if you notice on example 2, we don't have words. We don't have a ratio. The only thing that we have is a table. So we need to start with the table. So I noticed that I have flour. I'm going to call that x, and I have eggs. So I'm going to call that y. So this must be like something to do with baking or something like that. And I'm going to take my first ratio that I see, which is this one right here, and I'm going to use it to write out my ratio. So my ratio is 2 to 4. So I know that I can write it like this. I can write it like this, and I can also write it like this. Okay. And then I can go ahead and put it in words. I'm just going to make sure that I use the proper words. Like, for instance, the 2 has to be flour, and the 4 has to go with eggs. So I can say for every 2, and flour is measured in cups, so for every 2 cups of flour, there are, or you could say you need, there are 4 eggs. So if you were thinking like maybe it's a recipe that every time you need 2 cups of flour, you need 4 eggs, okay? So I have the table and it's done, so I can go ahead and make my points. Like if I wanted to, I could just go ahead and start taking these values and making my x, y, remember, into my points so that I'm ready to graph. So the first one is going to be 2, 4. Remember, these are coming right from here. 4, 8, 6, 12, and 8, 16. If you hear snoring right now, it's Lucy. She just came in the room and she's snoring. Sorry about that. Okay, so x and y. So you can look at your example 1. That's the y. That's the x. And then I have to label them. So the x represents the flour. So I got to make sure, oh, sorry about that. I got to make sure that I put flour here. Okay. And then over here represents the eggs. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill out my table. I'm sorry, my graph with the values on the bottom. So flour is increasing by 2, so it's going 2, 4, 6, 8. So I'm going to put 2, 4, 6, 8. And then my eggs are increasing by 4. They're going 4, 8, 12, 16. So if you're already thinking about like what the relationship is, good. Okay, you may already like know what the equation is. Okay, so then you're going to start graphing. Remember, this is the origin. These are all what we call proportional relationships because they go through the origin and they're a straight line. That's going to be something that you learned in 7th grade. So it's important that you're seeing it now. So you're going to graph 2 4s. I'm going to go over to 2 and go up to 4. And then you're going to graph 4 8. So you're going to go over to 4 and then up to 8. And then 6 12. And remember, these are coming from here, which are then coming from the table. So it's all related. And then 612 is going to be right here because I go over 6 and up 12. And then 816 is going over to 8 and up to 16. And there's my line. It goes through the origin. Oops, it's proportional. I always put an arrow at the end of my line because lines go on forever. They're infinite. So I have to put an arrow at the end to indicate that. Okay? Now, let's see if we can figure out what the equation is. So I'm looking for the relationship. And I'm looking for the relationship between x and y. So for that, I'm going to go back to my table really quickly, and I'm going to see, well, how do I get from 2 to 4? So if you're guessing, or thinking actually, that you multiply by 2, yep, 2 times 2 is 4. Now remember, we can't just assume that it works if it works for one. We have to see if it works for all of them. So 4 times 2, yep, it's 8. 6 times 2, yep, it's 12. 8 times 2, yep, it's 16. Okay, so what's happening here is we are multiplying by 2. So we're taking the x value and multiplying it by 2 in order to get y. But remember, we're used to seeing it, or we're used to, but most people will write it like this: y is equal to 2x, like in your book and mathematically, because we want to say the function of x, which is why we'll learn that later. But just so you know that these two equations are the same. Okay, on the next example, example 3, what I want you to do is I want you to try example 3 on your own first. So in example 3, all you are given is the graph, and you have to figure everything else out. So pause the video. Let's be honest now. Pause the video and see if you can figure out at least one of the parts, or if you want to figure out all of the parts, pause the video and then see if you can get to that. Okay, so you should have paused the video, and then here is what you should have came up with. So from the table, I noticed that my first point is 2, 6. So 2, 6 was my first point. You should have started there because this is all you have is the graph, right? And then this next point right here is 4, 12. So that's where that one came from. And then the next one is 6, 18. And then the last one is 8, 24. And so this time you're working backwards and you're going to have to go there. Okay, and I wrote the simplified ratio too. You didn't have to do that. That's kind of me just being extra. Okay, so 2 to 6 is the ratio, and what's happening with x is it's multiplying by 3. That's why I put times 3 in red. Okay, so example 4, we are missing the words, we're missing the ratio, we're missing the table, we're missing the graph. The only thing that we have is an equation, so we have to work from there. This equation looks different because we've been using x and y, and they're giving us words like hours and miles so that we can figure out like what the words are for the ratio. So let's replace the h and the m with x and y because that's what we've been using. So h would be the same thing as x. So let's just make them look like the other ones. And m would be the same thing as y. So then this would also be the same thing as x. So 5x equals, and this would be the same thing as y. And that's how you're used to seeing it. And we've been rewriting it with y coming first. So y equals 5x. It's just like rewriting a sentence backwards. Okay, so now let's go to the table. I know that x is always on this side of the table and y is on this side. And x is hours. And y is miles. Okay, so we have the table. Now remember that the equation gives us the relationship. So what the equation is telling us right here is that we're multiplying by 5. So we have the relationship. We are multiplying each of these by 5. So I'm going to start with 1 hour in the table. I'm going to say 1 hour. And if I multiply it by 5, then I get my y value. And so 1 times 5 is 5. So then I can figure it out. And I know the relationship for all of them is 5, so I can put a 2 here. If I put a 2 here, then I'm going to get 10. If I put a 3 here and I multiply by 5, I'm going to get 15. And if I get a 4 here and I multiply by 5, I'm going to get 20. Okay, so now you can go to any part of that's left. You can write it in words, you can do the ratio, or you can do the graph. I would like you to write the ratio in ratio form, and then I want you to write it in words. So go ahead and pause the video. Okay, so you should have written something like, for every 1 hour you travel 5 miles, or you could have said for every 1 hour the car goes 5 miles, but make sure that it is 1 comes first and then 5. Okay, now I kind of started the graph already. I can go right to the graph now. Make sure you label it x, y. X is hours, y is miles. Remember these coordinates, that's what they're called, coordinates. They come from the table. So 1, 5 is right there. And then 2, 10 is right there. And then 3, 15 is here, and 4, 20 is here. And I connect them and I get a straight line that goes through the origin. I make sure that I put an arrow at the end to indicate that it goes on. And it's proportional because it goes through the origin and it forms a straight line. So this is a proportional relationship. If you need to go back and rewatch the video, go ahead and do that after you've taken your notes. Remember, this is going into your note-taking notebook. Be sure that you log it into your table of content. I think my periods are all on different pages, so I'm relying on you to update your table of content and write in the correct page number. Okay, first video down. Bye.